We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Wednesday, January 28th, 2026. Thanks for joining us here, rumble.com/amradpod, YouTube, the American Radicals Podcast, over at X at X America News, or at Real Steve Friend. But if you happen to be watching us over there on X, formerly Twitter, just hop on over to Rumble or YouTube so you can join the chat. If you listen after the fact to the audio format of the show, you can do that on Spotify, iTunes, and iHeart, and across all those platforms. Guys, make sure that you give us a subscribe, a follow, thumbs up, do all those things, drop in a comment or two. I'm trying to respond to those to try to boost the algorithm so we can expand the network out, expand the brand, and radicalize more Americans into our commonsensical way of thinking on today's program. And today is no exception. Today, we're going to be getting into some fun stuff. One of my most fun things, the return of the R word and the pearl clutching that's going on from the communists in the media about how that dastardly word has now re-entered the American lexicon. Also, DEI is deadly for the airline industry. The president wants rallies around the country to push the economy. Pam Bondi, Attorney General of the United States of America, has an ally in her fight against Epstein transparency. We have transgender Republicans now becoming more prominent in the media space, particularly on social media, and a runaway jury set a precedent on guns in Maryland. So, without further ado, let's get after it. You know, I have my buddy, fellow suspendable, Kyle Seraphin. I regularly go on his show on Fridays. We do it Friendly Fridays. And every time I go on, he always asks me at the end of the show, do you want to cover something that's fun first or something that's not so fun? And I'm a firm believer that the sweet meteor of death might strike at any instance. You always should go for dessert. And that's where we're going to start on this program today, because this one made me smile when I saw it reporting over from the New York Times, at one point a newspaper decrying the return of the R word. Headline, the R word returns, dismaying those who fought to oust it. For those who don't know, we don't have to censor ourselves or redact anything. The R word means retard, because in this house, my house, the Friend household, in the land of milk and honey, we say gay and retarded. And I am proudly saying it, not because I want to be mean, because I think it's an appropriate term for some particular instances that the New York Times can't quite seem to understand. So from this piece at the Old Gray Lady, for decades now, the R word has been regarded as a slur against people with intellectual disabilities, a word to be avoided. Yet, it has had a striking resurgence, in part because people in high-profile positions or power and influence have chosen to resurrect it. Perhaps the most significant rejection of the term came in 2010 when President Obama signed Rosa's Law, replacing mental retardation with, quote, intellectual disability in federal legislation and policies. But why decide to resurrect a term well known to offend a community that has been historically marginalized? All right, push pause there. We will return in a moment because it's just too delicious. I need to have seconds of my dessert. The term retarded, as a callback to the 1990s, like the term gay, was not used ever as a slur in my lifetime, and I've been on this planet for nigh on 4 decades now. In fact, I'm a man. You can come after me.
Come after me! I'm a man! I'm 40!
If you use the word retarded to insult someone who is of some sort of mental retardation, mental defect, then you're a jerk. Then there's physical consequences for that, and no one will ever shed a tear. In fact, the word retarded is used as a disparagement of people who know better, who are smart enough to know better. So for you to pearl clutch like the New York Times is here is really kind of ridiculous. But everything we are dealing with nowadays is political, and the New York Times is nothing but a political propaganda rag for the communist left in the country. So they're going to take this opportunity now to not just school marm you, Karen you, and say you shouldn't be using that dastardly word, which was perfectly acceptable a few decades ago, and it might come back into vogue organically, as I believe it has here, even if you believe it's artificial, it's astroturfed. I mean, there was a time when saying gay was actually acceptable. People who were homosexual, because that became the politically correct term eventually, were not offended by being called gay. They actually invited it. And then it became, out of parlance. You couldn't use that word anymore. It was offensive. We want to be called homosexual. And now there's LGBTQAI plus # rainbow kamikaze. It's back in vogue. But this is political because the New York Times wants to go after particular people, individuals who are positions of prominence and influence in the political space. So they're going to use every single lever that they can at their disposal. So the headline again, the R word returns, dismaying those who fought to oust it. Amy Hewitt, the director of the Institute on Community Integration at the University of Minnesota, so a professional useless person. The word's return reflects how a sizable part of the population believes that many people are a drain on our society, on our progress, and on what makes us great. Accurate. But that group of people doesn't include people who are actually suffering from a mental disability. It's from the sloths and the slugs and the people that get on welfare and are sucking out of the system. People that can't pull themselves up, not because they can't, but because they just won't. There's, I think it's Michael Malice actually put this out there. I think it's one of the shortest political tests that you can actually do. You ask somebody one question and see what the response is. Are some people better than others? If you answer that in the affirmative, yes, then you're probably right of center, libertarian leaning perhaps. If you have to go into a diatribe and include a land acknowledgement, throat clearing yourself, well, then you're left of center. So are some people better than others? Yes. And that's not a disparagement of people who were born with some sort of mental affliction, or it hit them later in life, or maybe they had a traumatic brain injury. I'm not a jerk, and I'm not going to get punched in the face on the playground. I'm calling people who should know better and should do better retarded, and I'm not going to apologize for that. One more time back to it, and then we'll move on because we got to have triple servings of the dessert today, guys. So Amy Hewitt, again, this director of the Institute on Community Integration, professionally a useless person, kind of retarded if you ask me. She pointed in particular to the Trump administration because they dismantled diversity, equity, and inclusion, and he's mean, orange, and literally Hitler. And apparently recognizing mental retardation is somehow falling in the lane of DEI because disability is included in DEI. Don't really make the connection there, but professionally useless people have nothing else to do all day long but to have mental masturbation sessions in which they make themselves even more retarded. And then we'll have to, again, move off of not just Trump, but his allies. So we go after Elon Musk and we say that in 2020, when it was called Twitter, there were about 2,000 uses of the word retarded a day on the social media platform. And now it's 46,000, which is a 2,000% increase. And I'm here for it. Lastly, Nicole LeBlanc, an advocate who has autism and an intellectual disability, so I wouldn't call her retarded, that would be mean, said she has noticed how the word has returned as a common everyday insult, and hearing it, she said she feels the sting of stigma even when it isn't directed at her. Well, if you are feeling offended on behalf of other people, you're just not a good person. I answered in the affirmative. Are some people better than others? Yes. You're not one of them. You're getting offended on behalf of other people because you're going to presume that they take offense. You're not a very good person. So we'll move on because we actually do have to eat our peas and carrots. And that's going to begin with a conversation about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It doesn't just include people who have mental disabilities here. It involves people who are flying planes that millions of people are boarding every single day. From the New York Post. Headline: Despite Trump's efforts, airline DEI programs are still risking people's lives. Early on, the Trump administration ordered the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Transportation to rescind all DEI initiatives and return to merit-based hiring and promotions in the airline industry. Now, this particular individual, Daniel Huff, he analyzed every United States commercial flight crash attributed to pilot error since 2000. So a 25-year time lapse. It's not a huge sample size because crashes are actually pretty rare still. But this is what Mr. Huff found. 10% of pilots are women or minorities, yet 2 out of 3 of the plane crashes involve women or minority pilots. Now, further on, despite any pressure from the White House to get rid of DEI initiatives at the federal government level, private entities like Delta and United, they're still embracing it. As early as January 2025, during the current presidential administration, the Delta CEO said that they were steadfast in their DEI commitments. And United has a training academy with a goal of ensuring that 50% of the people who graduate are either women or minorities. So they care about what your color of your skin or what you got dangling between your legs, not whether or not you can take off or land a commercial aircraft. Now, crashes are rare because aviation technology is very good. But Daniel Huff points out in this piece from the New York Post, is not just limited to that, because the DEI hiring isn't just people who are keeping the planes in the air, taking off and landing. It's also going to include the engineers, the mechanics, or the people that are creating the artificial intelligence or tech that's necessary to correct pilot error when they are flying. It's not just the pilot error, people building the technology. The DEI policy is applying to them as well. So then those people won't be there to build and update the technology that has been averting all of these crashes. So there's a downstream consequence. It's not just the pilots, but the entire industry as it is. And the last thing we'll throw out is that they call it the cover-up playbook. They have a playbook as well, I guess, in the airline industry. And it comes from 1994, and it was the Navy's first F-14 pilot who crashed and died, a female. And they said, hey, she graduated. Everybody has to meet the standard. There was no problems. And then further investigation revealed that this woman, her name was Lieutenant Kara Hultgreen. She actually had 4 failures in the training academy that would have washed her out, but they recycled her. They gave her remedial training because they had to push her through because they wanted to have that DEI victory. And as a result, she died. She wasn't a capable F-14 pilot. That's one individual. What about the commercial airline pilot who's flying with hundreds of people in the air and then encounters some nasty weather or a technical malfunction? And because these training academies have a goal of graduating a certain number of people, not based on their ability to keep the aircraft in the air, but because they're tan enough or they have the proper genitalia, they're prioritizing those goals over the finished product, which is getting you as the passenger who's shelled out the money safely from point A to point B. I think that's kind of a retarded policy, don't you? All right, we'll stay on the president on this one, who I think he's been pretty good on DEI. But on this one, I'm going to have to disagree. Another R word is going to be returning to the lexicon, or at least to the front of mind. Rallies, the Trump rallies. Oh, man, election season is always around the corner, right? It's winter is coming. Election season is coming, always and forever. So this comes from the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness. Headline: Trump tries again to deliver a winning message on affordability. Although the economy has grown steadily in recent months, there are mounting signs of concern. Employers are hiring fewer people, wage growth is slowing, credit card delinquencies are rising. We just came out of the Christmas season. There's lots of debt that's mounted. and people were putting things on layaway. They're putting groceries on layaway. While the wealthiest have benefited from rapid stock market gains and rising home values, that hasn't been the case for most Americans. And that is the K-shaped economy that we have. You think about that letter K, where it kind of branches out. One goes up, one goes down. The richest are getting richer, and the middle class and lower class are getting poorer because their buying power is not going as far. They don't have that disposable income that the rich do. We all sort of have the same expenditures on staples. I mean, how much food can you really eat? So, man to man, if you got a guy who's 5'10" and he's a billionaire, another guy who's 5'10" and he's earning minimum wage, they kind of eat the same amount of food. It's just whether or not you have the disposable income on top of that. And then when we have inflation, this thing where the government prints money, then there's too many dollars chasing too few goods that are in the system. It's an economic condition. And as a result of that government spending, because of their programs or their welfare systems or borrowing or what they like to call quantitative easing, where they just put a whole bunch of money into the system, well, then the dollars you have in your bank account become worth less until they become worthless. Inflation is a problem, and people feel the squeeze. And it really doesn't matter about the stock market for most people. I mean, unless you're retired and you're living on the dividends of your mutual funds or your 401k or IRA, if you're just a regular, ordinary working person who's not of the retirement age, you can't take your 401k balance to the grocery store and say, hey, look, went up 16% last year. I'm doing really well. It's impacting your net worth, yes, but you can't eat that. Same thing goes for housing prices. Housing prices have skyrocketed. We've got housing shortages because we have 30, 40, 50 million illegal aliens in the country. And then on top of that, the dollars being used to purchase homes have not been worth what they once were even 5 years ago, 6 years ago during the coronavirus pandemic. And now the housing prices have gone up, and you can't eat the equity, though. So people aren't necessarily feeling it, even though their net worth, if you did an actual accounting of what they have in their bank account and their stock profile and portfolio and their real estate ownership, if you did all of that and summed it all up, their net worth might have accrued, but they're still buying yellow tag beef. They just don't have enough money at the end of the month. Actually, there's too much month at the end of the money. And it doesn't help to go and do these hype events, these rallies, that other R word. I'd actually characterize it as kind of retarded to do that. Why? Well, we have a proof of concept. The last president, Joe Biden, in his few cognitive moments when they injected enough Adderall into him, then they pulled the cameras back so you didn't see the pupils dilate to just pinprick size. And he would go or he would send out surrogates, or surrogates would go out on his behalf, because I doubt he was actually sending them out there. He was waiting on his next serving of pudding in the White House. But representatives from the Biden administration would talk about how the economy has never been better. And that was pretty cruel. It seemed like there was a disconnect between our elected betters and the people, the plebeian swine and the proletariat. They didn't connect. And that was one of the driving factors that pushed so many people to the polls to not just elect Donald Trump through the Electoral College like he did in 2016, but he also won the popular vote. It was a large coalition, and people were feeling the squeeze. And I don't think you're going to bring them back by just having these hype sessions and saying wages are up and everything is awesome. It's not true. People feel the squeeze. I think the more pragmatic thing, even though it goes perhaps against Donald Trump's nature, would be just to be honest with people. Hey, we're going through these things with the tariffs. Here's where the expectation is. This is where we are at now. This is where I project us to be. Like, do a presentation like you're the CEO meeting with your board of directors. The board of directors chooses the chief executive officer. The board of directors being the people in this case, who voted for the president, the chief executive of the government. Go out there and have a very honest and sober-minded talk with the American people. And you don't have to go and pump your fist and wave the red hats. I think that would actually go a lot further with people, because the people that enjoy the MAGA Donald Trump rallies, you've got them already. They're going to crawl over broken glass to vote for Lindsey Graham just because you endorsed him. It's the other people, the people that came over because they said, hey, that Joe Biden and his acolytes, they're jerks. They're saying I'm doing well and I'm not. Those people need to have that sober minded conversation, and we just haven't had it. Now, we can talk about other acolytes within the Trump administration, not just the president himself. Let's talk about not just one, but two attorneys general, which is one of the weirdest phrases that actually is out there. I don't know why we don't call them attorney generals. It's attorneys general. And I saw this opinion piece over at the Wall Street Journal, written by one William P. Barr. Bill Barr, former attorney general for Donald Trump, the first administration, and he wrote it in defense of Pam Bondi, current attorney general in the second Trump administration, and it pertains to her failures on Epstein. The headline is, Why Pam Bondi Didn't Publish All the Epstein Files in 30 Days. They're in material breach of the Epstein Transparency Act that passed through Congress and was signed by the president. Well, Bill Barr wants to weigh in on this. So let's read what the former attorney general has to say and then give him an honest assessment of whether or not he has a fair point to make. He has been in that seat actually 2 times. I believe he was the attorney general under Trump and under Bush, maybe Bush number 1. I think it's Bush number 1. So from Bill Barr, House Democrats, aided by a handful of misguided Republicans, forced passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act in November. Okay, I'm going to pause right there. You've lost all credibility, Bill Barr. House Democrats with a handful of Republicans. It passed unanimously through the Senate, which the Republicans control majority. It passed through the House like 420-1. Bipartisan support. It was signed by the White House immediately. So now we're going to go into the partisanship, the policy. It's the Democrats' fault, according to Bill Barr, that we have to require the attorney general to turn over information that the American people demanded, because in this country, theoretically, an objective force for good, we don't allow elite pedophile rapists to go free because they have political connections. So I didn't make it that long into the op-ed, but I mean, we can proceed because he does have a certain modicum of subject matter expertise on running the Department of Justice. So let's maybe get to the nuts and bolts of why Pam Bondi sucks at her job. Is it just because she's retarded, or maybe there's some institutional problems? Now, the upfront work needed to prepare the staggering volume of material for review, collecting everything responsive, uploading it to the required platforms, and promulgating protocols to train hundreds of reviewers could easily consume most of the 30 days itself. So Bill Barr is saying, well, we have to train people to do the job that they're already trained to do, and we have to upload the documents to a place where it's already uploaded, and that's going to take 30 days. Let's move at the speed of government. But then he goes beyond that. Once we get beyond that, then we actually have to get hundreds of people trained on how to find identifying information and make sure that we redact it. Or, I know that you're a creature of the 90s, Bill Barr. So you might not know this right now. There's these features on these computers where you hit a couple buttons and you can search out key terms, and that would not necessitate you going through 2 million pages looking for one particular name. But now I'm implying that maybe perhaps Bill Barr lacks a mental acuity of somebody with a triple-digit IQ. Back again to the op-ed from the Wall Street Journal from Bill Barr, former attorney general, defending Pam Bondi, current attorney general. Now, resources have to be diverted from other obligations. Ultimately, it is the job of the attorney general as the head of the DOJ to judge how scarce resources can best be allocated among competing demands. In short, the attorney general is doing a conscientious and an admirable job by not diverting enough resources to comply with law. And then lastly, Bill Barr remarks, lawmakers, i.e. people in the Article 1 powers, the legislative branch, Congress, House of Representatives, the Senate, the people that voted nearly unanimously to do this. It wasn't just a couple of troublemaking Republicans with those dastardly Democrats. Lawmakers should focus on passing legislation that will help the Attorney General combat real dangers. Now, Bill Barr, what are those real dangers? It's the elite pedophile rapists are really the real danger, according to Bill Barr. Lawmakers need to focus in on passing laws to go after the real bad guys, like violent crime, trafficking drugs, and government fraud. Because apparently, the former two-time Attorney General of the United States isn't aware that there's already laws in the books against violent crime, drug trafficking, and fraud. Maybe he was also absent the day they taught law at law school, or he's just out there pontificating, hoping that the readership at the Wall Street Journal, which I had to become a member of. I got the free membership, guys. Sorry. I wanted to get this article for today. They're going to swallow this and now wave pom-poms for Pam Bondi. Well, when they do, maybe they should get the full mosaic of the current Attorney General of the United States in all her splendor to find out just how retarded she is. Attorney General Bondi graced us again on Fox News, which she just loves to do, and shows her mental acuity.
Rape, homicide, manslaughter. That's who they're trying to protect in Minnesota. I do not understand these people. We sent Governor Walz a very strong letter today. We had been working on this letter. We got it out saying that he better support President Trump. He better support the men and women in law enforcement, because if he doesn't, we are. And that's what we're doing right now.
Were there any consequences in this letter?
Well, we'll see. This is fluid. Let's see how Governor Walz responds. Let's see what he does based on this, based on what's happening right now. But this administration is going to support the citizens. We're going to support our great men and women in law enforcement.
Were there any consequences, Attorney General Bondi? Well, it's a fluid situation. I thought you worked really hard on that letter, General Bondi, Madam General Bondi. You worked so hard on that letter to send it out to Tim Walz, and you told him that if he didn't, then why I oughta. You're Yosemite Sam, who's drawing a line in the sand, and Bugs Bunny just keeps drawing line after line after line after line until you walk off a cliff. You're that retarded if you think that anybody within the sound of my voice, or in that clip there, it's Fox News, millions of people. Do you think that anybody who isn't actually mentally disabled, and I won't call the R word, but anybody with an above room temperature IQ would believe that you're actually doing anything of merit or value? She's talking about Minnesota, where Pam Bondi, is reported in CBS News, has sent a letter to Tim Walz. Now, what was included in this letter, pray tell? Headline from CBS: Bondi seeks Minnesota voter rolls, welfare data to help bring back law and order in the wake of shootings. So we're conflating a bunch of different various problems and issues in one giant letter that apparently the Department of Justice felt that they had to mail out to Minnesota. It's a 3-page letter. And the Trump administration has pressed for greater access to Minnesota jails and prisons. And they're saying, hey, just let us into the jails to get those illegal aliens, and then we'll back out some of the ICE people. So we're doing the art of the deal where we just give them everything we want, because you can go into the jail anytime you want. Just letting you know. Pam Bondi said that the federal government needs access to state voter roll data to confirm Minnesota's voter registration practices comply with federal law. And she demanded records on Medicaid and food stamps. And were there any consequences listed? No further information. In fact, I know there weren't any consequences listed, not just because Pam Bondi sounded like a complete moron while she was on Fox News this time, or I mean, that's kind of par for the course for her, but because the Secretary of State for Minnesota responded to this letter. His name is Steve Simon, and he said in a statement, quote, "The answer to Attorney General Bondi's request is no." So we're done here. We're done. We'll just move on. I guess the art of the deal fell through. Okay, and we can get off of one retarded woman, and we can move over to another individual who wants to become a retarded woman, but it's actually a dude. What am I talking about? It's a piece from the Washington Post. Headline: Blair White is trans, MAGA, and extremely online. It's a living. And for those watching here on rumble.com/amradpod or YouTube, the American Radicals podcast, or maybe later on Spotify, we're at about the 30-minute mark here if you want to jump over. And I should have given you the barf bag warning, as you will see the image of this dude who feels pretty with a pink AR conversion. I believe that's a Glock pistol that's been converted to a long gun, walking onto the screen and blowing you a kiss. I can't look at it anymore, so I actually got an archive vision, and we will dismiss this image of Mr. Blair White. The headline, again, Blair White is trans, MAGA, and extremely online. It's a living. Now, this is a long expose on this guy. And goes into just kind of how lucrative it is, because this is the nature of the society we live in right now, where Blair White has, a psychological condition, a psychiatric problem where he thinks that he's a woman. But Washington Post is sort of in an unusual position, because he is portraying himself to be rather conservative, and Washington Post, Democracy Dying in Darkness, hates that, but they like the T portion. So how do they balance this act and come out as sounding something coherent? So to the piece, quote, "Don't say the T word too loud," Blair told Joey Sarson, her fiance and producer. This dude has a fiance. Okay. There are many ways to understand Blair White. Here's one. She is a trans woman in Donald Trump's America. Apart from her support of adults who want to transition, Blair's views on trans rights are deeply conservative. 2 genders. No women no trans women, so no men competing in women's sports. Government ban on trans procedures for kids. And Blair White argues that trans women, like herself, are not women. Quote, "I'm too trans for the right and too right for the trans. Now, what is a trans woman to do?" Well, this seems genuine and authentic. We're not living in gay and retarded times at all, where this person gets a giant spread in the Washington Post and some sort of sympathetic coverage here. But really, the game is given away as you proceed on through this piece, where it goes into the hundreds and hundreds of dollars that Blair White spends to inject collagen and Botox into his face and nip and tuck to try to make himself look more and more like a woman, at least according to what his perspective is on what a woman. But he isn't a woman, so I don't know how he understands women to look. But what's the end game? Well, giant social media followerships on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram and podcasting, run for office. So I guess we can get to an R word. We're going to relocate in order to do that, because Blair White lives in Texas. And I mean, it is Austin, but that dog won't hunt. So Blair White has now decided to move to Southern California to run as a Republican, not in 2026, when the Republicans are going to get mollywopped in the midterms by the Democrats, but 2028, when the presidential cycle comes around, and maybe there's a little bit more energy and because of the rallies that'll be going on around the country, that's when Blair White is going to run for Congress in Southern California. And beyond sort of political ambition, Blair White has attracted a measurable attention to earn a living. She wouldn't say exactly how much money she makes, only that she doesn't have to work another day in the rest of her life. Very profitable. So these are the times we live. All right, we got one more to get to on the AMRAD pod for the day. And it is a story that I found in multiple locations. Jonathan Turley covered it, as did the Washington Post. So we'll go to that. And this is a runaway jury, another R word, that ruled in a lawsuit against Walmart on a Second Amendment case. So I know it's kind of out of left field, but it's Wednesday. We can get a little bit wacky today. Headline, Walmart found negligent for selling a shotgun used in a suicide. Blame the gun, not the individual. That's the way things are in Maryland, apparently. So the background for this story, this young man who killed himself, his name is Jacob Mace. Now his family sued Walmart because apparently Jacob was texting with a coworker explaining that he was really depressed. The coworker, her name Christina, she went to a store manager. I don't know why your instinct would be to go to a store manager, but she did, and said, "Hey, I'm concerned about Jacob. He's saying these things that he maybe wants to kill himself." The store manager had a conversation with Jacob. "Hey, man, checking in on you. How are you doing?" He said, "Oh, no, I'm okay. No problem." And then Jacob went into the Walmart and bought a shotgun from not the coworker or the manager, but another employee, and said, I'm buying the shotgun for my wife. And then he used it to kill himself. Now, the family brings this lawsuit. So there's a couple of concerns here. What is the actual perspective on, do we blame the individuals in the store? Is the store manager at fault here? Should he have advised everybody in Walmart about a privacy matter? I mean, mental health is kind of a privacy matter that if he had told everybody, that could have been grounds to sue on some sort of disability claim, right? Well, and what about Jacob lying? He lied in order to buy a firearm. That's a crime. Should they have fired Jacob because, hey, man, like this guy's, kind of struggling here? That again could have been a lawsuit. You're kind of between this rock and a hard place. If you had said, all right, you've expressed some suicidality, we have it verified, we're seeing the text messages, I know we checked in with you, but we're going to put you on like a list that we're not going to sell you these firearms. And does that last forever? Is it specific just to Walmart? Do you put something out around the greater area? They also actually called the police ahead of time, but didn't matter. Lawsuit went to verdict. It was a 10-day trial, and there's a ruling of $10.5 million that Walmart's gonna have to shell out to Jacob Mesa's family, and they might appeal it. But I think bringing this into the context of using the R word today is sort of important, because when you're thinking with your emotions, it inhibits your ability to actually think rationally and logically. I think the logical approach to this is, hey, tragic situation. This guy lied. The manager, the coworkers, they did everything they could within the bounds of the law and any sort of reasonable expectation. And I know we feel bad for this guy and for his family. But by awarding millions of dollars, because, it's Walmart, they're worth billions, they can afford it. Does that stand to reason? I mean, yes, Walmart can afford that. It's not going to make a big dent into their retained earnings. But now we have a precedent. Now we have this ruling in this court, and who's to say that the next time it won't be Walmart with the deep pockets? It'll just be a regular Joe with a gun store. And Walmart couldn't actually pass muster, and they are spending millions of dollars on their own legal counsel. What's the average American going to do to protect themselves here? We're all kind of retarded when we use emotions rather than common sense to examine the facts, do a proper analysis, and reach a reasonable conclusion. All right, so that's going to be the end of the show today, but we're going to send you off with a nice palate cleanse. And keeping with the return of the R word, I found this Tom Segura, comedian, and is also decrying on how it wasn't the right time to use the R word anymore. Here he is.
You can't say retarded anymore. It was just here, don't you remember? Retarded. That's fun. People get very upset. I don't really support the arguments against it. Like when people are like, you shouldn't say it. And you're like, why? They're like, what if there's one over there? And you're like, we never said it like that. We were never like, look at that guy. You didn't say it like that. You said it to describe an idea or a situation, Like if your friend was like, I'll pick you up at your house, and then we'll come back to my place, and then later we can go back to your house, and we can get your bags, and then we'll come back over here after that. And you're like, well, that's retarded. Why the f*** would we do that? But now you can't say that. Now you got to be like, that's not smart. Your idea has an extra 21st chromosome, if you ask me.
I think you might have done a better job than me summing it all up. All right, guys. Thanks again for joining us today on the American Radicals podcast. Be glad to be back with you tomorrow, 12 o'clock Eastern time on rumble.com/amradpod, YouTube, the American Radicals podcast. And until then, Have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.